Now the Ishmaelites had taken Joseph to Egypt and sold him to Potiphar, one of the king's officers, who was captain of the palace guard. The Lord was with Joseph and made him successful. He lived in the house of his Egyptian master. Joseph was well built and good looking, and after a while his master's wife began to desire Joseph and asked him to go to bed with her. He refused. Although she asked Joseph day after day, he would not go to bed with her. But one day, when Joseph went into the house to do his work, none of the house servants was there. She caught him by his robe and said, "Come to bed with me." But he escaped and ran outside, leaving his robe in her hand. She kept his robe with her until Joseph's master came home. Then she told him the story. Joseph's master was furious and had Joseph arrested and put in prison, where the king's prisoners were kept, and there he stayed. The chief jailer put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and made him responsible for everything that was done in the prison. The jailer did not have to look after anything for which Joseph was responsible, because the Lord was with Joseph and made him succeed in everything he did. Sometime later, the king of Egypt's wine steward and his chief baker offended the king. He was angry with these two officials and put them in prison in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same place where Joseph was being kept. So the wine steward told Joseph his dream. "In my dream, there was a grapevine in front of me, with 3 branches on it. As soon as the leaves came out, the blossoms appeared and the grapes ripened. I was holding the king's cup, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into the cup and gave it to him." Joseph said, "This is what it means. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days the king will release you, pardon you, and restore you to your position. You will give him his cup as you did before, when you were his wine steward. But please, remember me when everything is going well for you, and please be kind enough to mention me to the king and help me to get out of this prison. After all, I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here in Egypt I didn't do anything to deserve being put in prison." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation of the wine steward's dream was favourable, he said to Joseph, "I had a dream too. I was carrying 3 baskets on my head. In the top basket there were all kinds of pastries for the king, and the birds were eating them." Joseph answered, "This means what it means. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days the king will release you, and have your head cut off. Then he will hang your body on a pole, and the birds will eat your flesh." On his birthday, 3 days later, the king gave a banquet for all his officials. He released his wine steward and his chief baker, and brought them before his officials. He restored the wine steward to his former position, but he executed the chief baker. It all happened just as Joseph had said, but the wine steward never gave Joseph another thought. He forgot all about him. After 2 years had passed, the king of Egypt dreamt that he was standing by the river Nile when 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the river and began to feed on the grass. Then 7 other cows came up. They were thin and bony. They came and stood by the other cows on the riverbank, and the thin cows ate up the fat cows. Then the king woke up. He fell asleep again and had another dream. 7 ears of corn, full and ripe, were growing on one stalk. Then 7 other ears of corn sprouted, thin and scorched by the desert wind. And the thin ears of corn swallowed the full ones. The king woke up and realized that he had been dreaming. In the morning he was worried, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. He told them his dream, but no one could explain them to him. Then the wine steward said to the king, "I must confess today that I have done wrong. You were angry with the chief baker and me. and you put us in prison in the house of the captain of the guard. One night each of us had a dream, and the dreams had different meanings. A young Hebrew was there with us, a slave of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us. Things turned out just as he said. You restored me to my position, but you executed the baker. The king sent for Joseph, and he was immediately brought from the prison. After he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came into the king's presence. The king said to him, I have had a dream, and no one can explain it. I have been told that you can interpret dreams. Joseph answered, I cannot, Your Majesty, but God will give a favourable interpretation. The king said, I dreamt that I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the river and began feeding on the grass. Then 7 other cows came up, which were thin and bony. The thin cows ate up the fat ones, but no one would have known it, because they looked just as bad as before. Then I woke up. I also dreamt that I saw 7 ears of corn, which were full and ripe, growing on one stalk. Then 7 ears of corn sprouted thin and scorched by the desert wind, and the thin ears of corn swallowed the full ones. I told the dream to the magicians, but none of them could explain them to me. Joseph said to the king, God has told you what he is going to do. The 7 fat cows are 7 years, and the 7 full ears of corn are also 7 years. They have the same meaning. The 7 thin cows which came up later, and the 7 thin ears of corn scorched by the desert wind, are 7 years of famine. There will be 7 years of great plenty in all the land of Egypt. After that, there will be 7 years of famine. Now you should choose some man with wisdom and insight, and put him in charge of the country, and take 1/5 of the crops during the 7 years of plenty. The food will be a reserve supply for the country during the 7 years of famine which are going to come on Egypt.